In World War II, light utility vehicles of the Jeep type became the absolute backbone of modern mechanized armies. Fast, exceptionally reliable, and capable of traversing terrain where larger vehicles simply couldn't operate, these compact machines revolutionized military logistics and tactical mobility. In this video, we examine every major World War II Jeep-type vehicle, organized by nation. Starting with the United States, the Willys MB stands as the iconic image of the American Jeep, the vehicle that fundamentally defined what a general-purpose military transport should be. Entering full production in 1941 after intensive competitive testing, the MB was powered by a robust 60-horsepower four-cylinder Go Devil engine. Weighing just 2,450 pounds, yet capable of carrying 800 pounds of cargo or equipment, it proved rugged beyond belief, remarkably reliable even under brutal combat conditions, and incredibly adaptable to virtually any military role imaginable. Over 360,000 Willys MBs were manufactured during the war years, serving across every theater, from the frozen forests of the Ardennes to the scorching deserts of North Africa. It became a true symbol of Allied mobility, mechanical ingenuity, and America's industrial might during the conflict. Up next, the Ford GPW. Nearly identical in appearance and capability to the Willys MB, Ford built these utility vehicles using Willys' standardized blueprints under a licensing agreement beginning in 1942. Ford's massive manufacturing capacity and production expertise allowed them to ramp up output extraordinarily fast, ultimately producing over 277,000 units. This ensured that Allied forces received the massive volumes they desperately needed for conducting simultaneous global operations across multiple continents. The GPW served alongside the MB in every campaign, indistinguishable in combat performance. The Ford GP represented one of the critical early prototype Jeeps developed during the intense 1940-1941 competition to create America's standard light utility vehicle. The GP designation stood either for Government Project or possibly General Purpose, with the latter explanation contributing to the eventual Jeep nickname. It featured the recognizable flat hood design that would become iconic, but incorporated a different frame and body construction. Only about 4,500 were produced before being quickly phased out when the final standardized MB design was officially adopted in 1941. Moving on, the Bantam BRC-40. This represents the original pioneer who started the entire Jeep revolution. The tiny Bantam company, despite its limited resources, designed the very first vehicle to successfully meet the United States Army's extraordinarily stringent 1940 requirements for a quarter-ton reconnaissance car. Though the larger Willys company ultimately won the major production contract due to Bantam's limited manufacturing capacity, Bantam still produced approximately 2,600 of these remarkably robust little vehicles between 1940 and 1941. Many were supplied to Britain and the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease, where they proved the fundamental Jeep concept under actual combat conditions. The Willys MA served as the direct developmental ancestor to the legendary MB. Entering limited production in 1941, this was Willys' initial submission during the competitive trials that would determine America's standard light vehicle. It featured a column-mounted gear shift rather than the floor-mounted shifter that would become standard, and utilized a simpler single-gauge instrument cluster. Most MA models, approximately 1,500 units, were sent straight overseas to Allied forces for extensive testing and battlefield evaluation under actual combat conditions, providing crucial feedback that refined the final MB design. Continuing with the United Kingdom, the standard light utility, commonly nicknamed the Tilly, represented Britain's closest indigenous equivalent to the American Jeep throughout World War II. Entering production in 1941, this compact vehicle utilized a four-cylinder engine producing about 32 horsepower. Like the Jeep, it served as a versatile platform employed for personnel transport, liaison duties between headquarters, light cargo hauling, and reconnaissance across virtually all fronts where British and Commonwealth forces fought. Over 13,000 were manufactured, serving from the Western Desert to Burma, though it lacked the Jeep's four-wheel drive capability and consequent off-road performance. Moving on to Germany, the Volkswagen Kübelwagen served as Germany's primary answer to the light utility vehicle requirement. Entering production in 1940, this vehicle was extremely lightweight at just 1,500 pounds and mechanically simple, utilizing a rear-mounted air-cooled flat-4 engine producing 25 horsepower. Despite lacking four-wheel drive, its excellent weight distribution, high ground clearance, and limited slip differential provided superb off-road performance that often surprised Allied observers. It proved especially valuable operating in the deep, soft sands of North Africa, where its light weight prevented bogging down. Over 50,000 were produced, serving on every front from the frozen Russian steppes to the deserts of Libya. The Volkswagen Schwimmwagen, the famous amphibious Volkswagen, represented an ingenious evolution of the Kübelwagen design. Entering service in 1942, this remarkable amphibious utility vehicle featured a watertight hull and a simple screw propeller that folded down from the rear for water propulsion, achieving about 6 miles per hour when swimming. Truly versatile and capable of crossing rivers, lakes, and flooded terrain without requiring bridges or fords, it represented a remarkable piece of German military engineering. Approximately 14,000 were produced, seeing extensive service, particularly on the Eastern Front, where Russia's numerous waterways made amphibious capability invaluable. Next up, the Stoer R200 Spezial. This was a German heavy four-wheel drive utility vehicle that formed part of the Wehrmacht's standard medium troop and equipment roster. Entering service in 1937, it featured sophisticated independent suspension on all four wheels, providing excellent ride quality and off-road capability. While mechanically advanced, its complexity made battlefield repairs challenging when spare parts became scarce. Several thousand served throughout the war, particularly during the early campaigns in Poland and France. The Horch 901, another powerful standardized German military transport vehicle produced by the Horch Luxury Automobile Company. Entering Wehrmacht service in 1937, this distinctive machine was known for its boxy, angular appearance and robust four-wheel drive system. It served reliably throughout the conflict, primarily employed for carrying Wehrmacht officers, staff personnel, and vital communications equipment. Its reputation for dependability made it highly valued, despite increasing fuel shortages limiting its deployment in later war years. Next up, Japan. The Kuragane Type 95 served as the primary Japanese light utility vehicle throughout the Pacific War and operations in China. First entering production in 1936, it holds the significant distinction of being widely cited as the world's first mass-produced four-wheel drive vehicle, predating the American Jeep by several years. Powered by a small 1,300cc air-cooled V-twin engine producing just 33 horsepower, it featured a distinctive motorcycle-like front fender design. Very rugged and well-suited for Pacific Island terrain despite its minimal power, approximately 4,800 were produced. Its compact size proved advantageous during jungle warfare and island-hopping campaigns where larger vehicles couldn't operate effectively.
The Toyota AK-10 was a Japanese utility vehicle heavily influenced by the captured American Bantam design that Japanese engineers studied carefully. Entering limited production around 1942, it was manufactured in relatively small numbers, perhaps only a few hundred units. It clearly demonstrates the deliberate efforts by Japanese industry to rapidly emulate successful foreign military vehicle designs when faced with American Jeep superiority in mobility and reliability. Continuing with France, the Lafley S15R was a French light reconnaissance vehicle distinguished by its unique and unusual six-wheeled configuration, providing enhanced cross-country mobility. Entering service in 1938, it was produced before France's catastrophic defeat and occupation in June 1940. After the fall of France, substantial numbers were captured intact and immediately repurposed by the German Wehrmacht, which found them useful for patrol and liaison duties in occupied territories. The LAFFY V15T was a slightly heavier and physically larger French military utility vehicle compared to the V15, entering service in 1938. Used primarily for towing light artillery pieces, including 25mm anti-tank guns and 75mm mountain howitzers, this capable four-wheel drive vehicle represented another uniquely French design. Like virtually all French military equipment, many were quickly appropriated for service under German command after the 1940 occupation, serving throughout occupied France and other theaters. Moving on, the Peugeot DMA. This represented a standard French civilian truck or commercial van chassis that was rapidly adapted for wartime military utility use beginning in 1939. Primarily employed for local logistics and supply duties rather than frontline combat operations, it was frequently seen carrying essential supplies, ammunition, and provisions. A simple, mechanically straightforward workhorse for the French military, it lacked sophisticated features but proved adequate for rear-area transportation needs. Let's move on to Italy. The SPA Viberti AS-43 was an Italian light reconnaissance vehicle, essentially a lightly armored car employed extensively for reconnaissance patrols and high-speed scouting duties in the North African desert campaigns. Entering service in 1942, it was fast, with a top speed exceeding 50 miles per hour and relatively well-armed for its weight class, typically mounting either a 20mm cannon or heavy machine guns. It saw active service under both Italian Royal Army Command and later under German Wehrmacht control after Italy's September 1943 armistice. The SPA TL-37 was an Italian light artillery tractor rather than a personnel carrier. Entering service in 1937, it was clearly distinguished by its four massive wheels and exceptionally high ground clearance designed specifically for desert operations. Its primary purpose was hauling medium artillery pieces, including 100mm howitzers, across the rough, challenging terrain characterizing North African battlefields, where conventional trucks struggled. Now let's look at Czechoslovakia. The Tatra 57K was a Czech light utility vehicle, essentially representing a militarized version of Tatra's successful pre-war civilian automobile. After Czechoslovakia was occupied and absorbed into the German sphere following the 1938 Munich Agreement and subsequent 1939 invasion, production continued under German supervision. Used extensively by Wehrmacht forces for liaison work, staff transport, and communications duties, it reflected how occupied nations' industrial capacity was systematically exploited to supply the German war machine. The Praga AV represented another reliable utility vehicle originating from Czechoslovakia's respected Praga Automotive Works. Following the German occupation, it was produced extensively and employed by Axis forces throughout Europe for light transport, reconnaissance, and liaison duties. This vehicle represents the broader systematic utilization of occupied Czechoslovakia's advanced industrial output to support German military operations across multiple fronts. Continuing with Canada, the Chevrolet C15A Canadian military pattern, often simply called the CMP or nicknamed Blitz, was developed jointly by Canadian and Australian military requirements. Built on a standardized General Motors platform beginning in 1940, these versatile vehicles were highly adaptable to various military roles and relatively straightforward to maintain even in harsh, primitive environments with limited workshop facilities. Over 180,000 were manufactured in Canada, serving extensively across the Mediterranean, Pacific, and Middle Eastern theaters with British, Canadian, Australian, and other Commonwealth forces. And our final category, the Soviet Union. The GAZ-64 represented the Soviet Union's first indigenous Jeep equivalent vehicle, designed incredibly rapidly under desperate wartime pressure following Germany's June 1941 invasion.
Entering production in late 1941, it was powered by a 50-horsepower four-cylinder engine and featured four-wheel drive. However, it suffered from a critically narrow track width of just 1,250 millimeters, making it dangerously prone to tipping over on uneven ground or during sharp turns. Only about 600 were produced before this fundamental design flaw forced a complete redesign. The GAZ-67 represented a significant and essential improvement over the problematic GAZ-64 model. Entering production in late 1943, Soviet designers successfully addressed the critical stability issues by substantially widening the wheel track to 1,446 millimeters, dramatically improving handling and preventing rollovers. This practical, rugged vehicle became the Soviet Union's standard light utility transport for the latter half of the war, with approximately 92,000 produced. It served throughout the massive Soviet offensives of 1943 to 1945, from Kursk through the liberation of Eastern Europe and the final assault on Berlin. Up next, the GAZ-67B. This represented a further mechanical refinement of the proven and reliable GAZ-67 chassis, entering production in 1944. Incorporating minor but meaningful improvements to the body construction, engine reliability, and overall performance, this enhanced version proved even more dependable. The GAZ-67B continued in reliable frontline service throughout the remainder of the war and remained in Soviet military service for many years after 1945, eventually being replaced only in the 1950s. These compact vehicles carried generals to the front and wounded soldiers to safety. They mounted machine guns, hauled artillery, led reconnaissance patrols into enemy territory, and transported the countless supplies that kept armies moving forward. The drivers who operated them faced constant danger, from ambush, artillery, mines, and simple mechanical failure in hostile territory miles from friendly lines. These weren't glamorous machines, they were tools of survival, workhorses that allowed armies to maneuver, communicate, and fight across terrain that would have stopped previous generations' forces completely. In mud, sand, snow, and jungle, these vehicles proved that warfare had fundamentally changed. Mobility meant survival, and these light utility vehicles provided exactly that, carrying the weight of modern war on four small wheels, one desperate mile at a time.